Hey, well, welcome everybody. I'm going to wait a couple minutes here for the time to be 3 minutes when the time gets up to, 10 o'clock here, and then we'll start so that everybody can come in. It's good to see you all, and welcome to this month's webinar. And it's going to be on accelerated learning, and a topic that I've been interested in and practiced for my whole life, and we'll talk about that a bit, but and why it's important now. But it's good. I can't believe we're through the first quarter of the year. Wow, unbelievable. And it's just it's good to see you all. And let's just get ready here. I'm going to have a little bit of coffee. So I don't know if you notice on my bookshelf, I added my little cool retro radio there. I like that. And these books over here are all mine, some of my books, and just sort of been tidying it up a little bit. And I've noticed that a lot of people are using bookshelves as a background now, and I think it's a great way. I think it's just a super easy background, and it really, shows what we're about. I'm just a total bibliophile, love books, and that's part of learning, right? Is reading is probably the quickest way to learn. That's the accelerator, at least in my experience. Oh, that's good coffee, and much appreciated. My wife just brought me that cup of coffee. You know, that's the way to my heart is a fresh cup of coffee. So let's see. We got 1 minute here, and I just don't want to start early and have people miss. Because I said I was going to start on the hour, and by gumption, that's what I'm going to do. But this is going to be a really good one. I'm very excited to talk about this with you. So, okay, welcome. Here we are. It's the top of the hour, and I'm going to start the MBA ASAP webinar on accelerated learning. Really, really excited to talk about this subject. This is something that I have studied and contemplated and actually practiced and worked with for a long time. So I have different techniques that I'm going to share, ones that have really worked for me and I know will work for you. And I'm just going to start with a quick story about, when I really started to think about accelerated learning as a skill set that could help me to develop quicker and get ahead of the competition and really differentiate myself in ways. Number one, I'm absolutely always curious, so I'm constantly learning. I just can't help myself. Sort of like sharks are always swimming. I'm always learning because I'm intensely curious, and I know you all must be too. And so it's really basically an excuse to just go follow your curiosity in any direction it's going to take you. And that's the kind of things that you can learn. Because if you're curious about something, there's a reason for that. And then you're more interested in learning about it. So you do a better job of learning. And through that learning, you sort of make explicit whatever it was, that initial curiosity or that interest, that little voice in your head said, what about that subject? What about that subject? And so by doing that, we tend to reveal ourselves to ourselves. It's almost like a growing mirror. We learn our own truth by following our curiosity, because that's the little voice telling us what we what might help us, what should learn. And it's amazing. You start to dive into a subject, and all of a sudden, all these paths open up, all these opportunities become available. It's really remarkable. It's a great way to live, to live a life. So the way that when I first started to think about this, I was in getting my MBA at Wharton, and one of my professors, he was teaching entrepreneurship, and this guy was just, he wasn't an academic, he was a pracademic. He basically, you know um, had built companies. He owned a bank, he controlled all kinds of different companies. He was really amazing. And what he said put him apart was that he could learn any subject in like a week to 2 weeks. And he would just get the books, get the things, and find out what are the most important fundamental subjects there, and go after them. And so that really stuck with me. It's like, wow, you can learn that fast if you just focus on what the fundamentals are, what the biggest, things to do, and think of it as a skill. And that's what he said, dominated his life. He could learn faster than anybody, he claimed. And I thought that is really cool. And that stuck with me. And so that's basically that's the basis for all of this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start the slide deck, right? And accelerated learning, this is MBA, ASAP, business skills as soon as possible. And so, 7 science-backed techniques for mastering any skill. And I'm going to throw in a couple of others too, but that's basically what we're going to talk about. So here's the first real slide here, and this is a quote from Neil Postman, who's an incredible educator, pedagogue, pedagogy guy. Kids enter school as question marks, and they leave as periods. We enter with such curiosity, and we get that curiosity sort of squeezed out of us through here's all the things we need to learn, and then you have to regurgitate it through tests and all. And school prepares us for tests, but not for the ultimate test, learning itself, learning how to learn. How do we learn? And we all learn differently. And every subject we learn a little bit differently. And the skill of learning is rarely taught. And it's so intensely important for us, right? We have our brain, but we don't really have a manual how to use it. It's an untrained tool. And, facts, are the seeds, and understanding is the root. Think of it like a garden, right? And mastery is the bloom. And I like garden metaphors. I've always in my high school yearbook, under my picture, the one thing I wrote was, "We must cultivate our garden," which is the end of Candide, the book by Voltaire. And I've always lived by that and loved that idea about our mind is like a garden that we cultivate. What we put into it, how we develop it, how we nurture it, how we grow it, how we water it. And metacognition, how to think about thinking, thinking about how to think, learning how to learn, how do we think? And that's a big part of this too, is as we develop these skills, the skill of learning, it's fun sometimes to use ourselves as our own little experiment. I've done this many times. I did this when I learned to play the piano. And I learned to play the piano basically as an adult. And I learned to play jazz piano. And as I was doing it, I started thinking about, well, how do I learn? And using all different kinds of tools, like getting books, getting CDs, play along CDs, looking at videotapes of people, or YouTube videos of how people play, and just learning from all the listening to different actual music and things. So all these different ways of trying to see, how do I learn best, and practicing and what to practice. And it was really interesting. I really took that as it was the first time I took it as a project, that it was sort of a meta thing, like, okay, I'm going to see how I best learn and deploy all these different ways and see which ones stick. And it was really, really interesting. And I ended up really learning how to play the piano, which was the really cool part. And it's so satisfying. I do that to this day. Um, so this is what we're going to cover today. We're going to cover some specific techniques, but first we're going to talk about why learning faster, accelerated learning, right? And not only learning, but how do we retain what we learn so we can actually use it? It's not learning for learning's sake, right? It's learning so that we have skills that empower us, that then we can deploy in the world and be super satisfied about how we are learning. And welcome, Joseph Santos. It's great to see you. Um, and then we'll talk about the Pareto Principle, Feynman Technique, which actually, in a way, I'm using right now. So we'll talk about that. Active recall, spaced repetition, the Harvard techniques, and a fast learning formula. And this whole idea is from, I have two books on this subject, and that's what I've sort of taken from and condensed down into this slide deck in this talk. Learning how to learn, how to be a learning ninja, and lifelong learning. That I think that it's always being a lifelong learning, being an autodidact. That means, didact is learning things. Auto means teaching yourself. So satisfying. And we have so many tools that we can do that now. We have so much content, so many resources that we can avail ourselves on. I mean, you can sign up for free to take a course from, Harvard or Stanford or University of Chicago or all these incredible schools, or from all these incredible professors and teachers, or you can look at YouTube videos. I mean, and you can learn anything. I mean, you can sit back on YouTube and just say, well, how do I fix a carburetor for a 1955 Chevrolet Bel Air? And there'll probably be 10 different great videos that you can learn that subject really quickly. So these are these are my books. And sorry, I got a little bit behind there, but yeah, here's what we're going to study. Talk about. Here's the books. My two books. And go pick them up, read them. So why do we need to learn faster? Why do we need to cultivate this skill? Well, I really like this quote by Alvin Toffler, and he wrote a great book called Future Shock. It was in the 60s, and it was about the accelerated pace of change and how everybody was feeling disrupted. Well, guess what? Since he wrote Future Shock in the 1960s, or maybe it was 1970, but it was early on, um, what the pace of change has only radically accelerated, right? So we're in a place now where things are changing so quickly. We have to really keep up with what's going on in the world. And what he said here is, the illiterate of the future, not going to be that they just can't read, right? That we can't read, are not those that cannot read or cannot write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And I think that's absolutely the skill set. So, with that in mind, we have to learn things. We have to be willing to um, discharge things that no longer serve us, that have become obsolete, or irrelevant, or marginalized in some way, and relearn new skills. Think if you're like a computer coder or a computer scientist. Think of that is constantly living on a steep learning curve, where you're jettisoning one programming language for another, one set of tools for another, one platform for another, a different database, all those kind of things. And uh, all of our professions are like that now. And now we're living in a place where, I mean, we're all feeling the rapid change from artificial intelligence. ChatGPT, Claude, these OpenAI and Anthropic tools, and what's going on with Google, and just all kinds of incredible, rapid changes. Like you know, Anthropic just launched 72 complete applications in 50 days. I mean, the rapid pace of this stuff is just absolutely insane. So to keep up with that, and not to feel like you're falling behind, or not to feel vertiginous, like dizzy about it, you really have to be comfortable with accelerated learning and getting rid of things that don't serve us anymore. The unlearned part. I always think of that from the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance book by Persing. That idea of the monkey trap, where it's a barrel, and in the side of a barrel is a small hole that a monkey can fit his hand through, and inside is a coconut. And monkeys love coconuts. So they'll go in, they'll put their hand in, they'll grab the coconut, and then they can't get it back out with look at my hand. Whoa. They can't get their hand back out, because the coconut, with holding the coconut, their hand is too big to get through the tiny hole that they put their hand through. So instead of releasing the coconut and pulling their hand out and getting out of the trap, they will sit there with their hand on the coconut in the trap until they're caught. I mean, it's an incredibly ingenious trap. And it's also an incredibly ingenious metaphor for us wanting to hold on to what we know and staying the way the thing, wishing the way things are. And so we're uncomfortable with unlearning. It's like a sunk cost, right? I spent so much time learning that skill. I can't get rid of it now, even though it's become a burden and it's no longer serving us. So really being able to clean house, get rid of stuff that we don't need anymore, don't know anymore, don't aren't serving us anymore is really a skill set. And learning how to learn is the most important skill of the 21st century. It really, really is for us. And if we improve just a little bit each day, that's a multiplier over time because it's compounds. Everything we learn compounds, just like interest, in finance. And if you want to learn about compound interest, take my corporate finance course or get my finance book. So here is an interesting quote, and one that is very, very applicable, right? And this is from Darwin. It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It's the one most adaptable to change. And that is key, right? That's what we're talking about. Learn, unlearn, relearn, being adaptable to change. And we have to be adaptable to change in this modern world. So it's really, thinking about what Darwin knew in the 1860s, an incredibly smart guy. But that is just important to think about. We have to be adaptable to change if we want to survive. We are in a social Darwinian kind of world. And now I want to show you this guy, this next guy here. Um, so I really like this quote too. Learning is not compulsory, but neither is survival. And that goes right to addressing the Darwin thing, right? You want to survive? Hey, learning isn't compulsory, but survival isn't compulsory either. So if you want to be a survivor and a thriver, then we have to get on the track of learning. And what's the key accelerant to learning? One of the basic things, I mean, there's lots of different ways, but like behind me here, all these books, I'm a constant reader. And reading is just a way to accelerate, to get other people's ideas in such a compact and distilled form that then we can directly engage into our mind. It's just awesome. So, I really like that quote. It's harsh, but it's kind of true, right? It's really true. And then this one below, this is another one that sort of relates to the Darwin quote. In times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. Once again, right, like the monkey with the hand in the trap on the coconut. We want to hold on to things. The world no longer exists that we were trained for. A lot of people, you go to college or you go to get your training, you get your PhD even or whatever, and then you think it's a static world. Now I know everything there is to know, and now I'm just going to use that knowledge for the rest of my life. And it turns out that life doesn't really work that way. You got to keep on learning, right? So I love this stuff. I hope you do too. I hope you really are digging this. Um, so there's two kinds of learners, right? There's the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. And this is that Carol Dweck book. I think she's a professor at Stanford, but she wrote the growth mindset, book. And basically a fixed mindset, like I just talked about, right, is static. Your talent is fixed. You're born with talent. That's the thing, you avoid new challenges to protect your ego, see effort as pointless. Why should I go through that? And ordinary folks want entertainment, right? Instead of learning, oh, that's kind of boring. I'm just going to sit back and scroll on my phone or watch, reruns of Gilligan's Island or some show or something like that, right? And where a growth mindset, it's an understanding, it's optimistic, right? That you can expand, that you can learn things, that you can actually do things. I love that, abilities grow through dedication, that as you put in effort and over time, your abilities can actually expand. And that's a wonderful thing to see yourself grow, and you helping yourself do that. You're doing that for yourself, and embrace challenges as the path. The obstacle is the way. And effort is the engine of mastery. It's not, practice doesn't make perfect, but perfect practice makes perfect. And Effortless Mastery is a great book, and that's the way I like to think about that, where you're actually continually to getting better. Atomic Habits is a really super book and ideas for this kind of stuff. And extraordinary people, which we all are, seek knowledge and seek more knowledge. And knowledge is power, right? So here we're going to talk about two modes of thinking. and these we use both of these. In the last slide, we want to replace a fixed mindset with a growth mindset. Here we want to use focused mode and diffuse mode for the right applications. And that's the thing, just like a screwdriver isn't great for hammering in a nail, and a hammer isn't great for screwing in a screw. We want to know, when do we use the right tool for the right job? And focus mode and diffuse mode both have their places. So focus mode, intense, direct concentration, working on known material. It's logical, analytical, sequential, and use it for drilling, problem solving. For known concepts. Now, diffuse mode is more creative, right? It's wide angle, relaxed, making new connections, and that's one of the things for a reason to be a generalist, to know lots of things, where you can take ideas from one field and transfer them over to another field and make those kind of connections. That's a real power of creativity, way to be creative. And it's creative big picture thinking. And you're doing new neural pathways you're creating. And use this for breakthrough ideas, and that's what we're all trying to do, right? Is make breakthrough ideas. Um, yeah, so I'm just trying to adjust this slide here, get to the next one. And so now let's get into a few of the techniques. So the first technique is spaced repetition. And again, I'm saying, cultivating our garden, and, water your knowledge with the right intervals. Maybe I stretched that metaphor a little too far, but that's it. And here is what we're, basically what we're doing here is, doing different times. The brain rewards the patient, gardener. Each review is going to help you. And so the first review you do is right after your initial study for like an hour. Right after an hour after you do your studying. The next is one day away, where you reinforce before forgetting sets in. And then 3 days later, a week later, a month later, and you really try to do it instead of cramming. You use spaced repetition. And excuse me for 1 second. I'm going to step out for a quick second. I'm going to be right back. Okay. Bye. Hey, I'm back. Yeah. So spaced repetition is a really great way to learn, and it's just keep repeating after time. And this is really a good way to, instead of cramming. Cramming does not work. I remember Once again, when I went to for my my MBA, I it was a 2-year program. I was 30 years old, so I was a little bit more mature than some of the students were in their early 20s and stuff. And, a lot of them, we have a couple of classes a week or whatever, a couple classes a day. And then they'd go and go play pool or go hang out, whatever they were doing, not studying and stuff. And then at the end of the semester, they'd pull all nighters and, stay up all night writing a term paper or studying, cramming for an exam. And then they take the exam and they might do okay on it because they were high performers and knew how to at least jump through the hoops of the tests and things like that. They had been working on that for their whole lives, right? Instead of really learning the material. What I did was I treated it as a 9 to 5 kind of job. I would go over to the school at like 9 in the morning, get there. And if I didn't have a class till noon, I would go to the library and study and read whatever. And then if I didn't have another class that afternoon, I'd stay there. I'd go back to the library or some other place and read and study once again. And or write, start writing. And I would, so my term papers were all done way ahead of time. I had all my ideas down. My, I had studied basically continually for my exams and things. So I always felt comfortable and rested and relaxed when that time came, where they would be frazzled and burnt out. And it's like, what's the point of doing that? And they wouldn't retain any of that knowledge anyway. After another day, all that stuff was a fond memory and they'd be back to the same habits. So we don't want to be that kind of person, right? So that's the word to the wise. So the 80-20 rule, this is really good. There's a whole, thing called power laws. And power laws are where one input has a non-linear and exorbitant output, and you're trying to find that. That's what happens with venture capitalists work that way, right? They have a portfolio of say 10 companies that they invest in, and they don't know which one is really going to succeed and which one is not. Ones that look really promising, many times just fall apart, right? So they hedge their bets, they diversify across a number of bets, and call them bets because they're very high risk, you know, and uh, and what they look for is, maybe 8 of the companies or 7 of the companies are going to fail. Maybe 1 or 2 are going to sort of putter along, and one they're hoping is going to explode and make the incredible returns, like 100x or type of return that then will pay back their limited partners and make them a great investment return, and wipe out the losses that they experience from all the ones that didn't make it. So that's power laws work in everything, and one of the most famous power laws is one called the Pareto Principle. And it's named after Pareto. I think his name was Enrico Pareto, but he was an Italian economist that came up with this. And basically, this power law, says that 80% of the results come from 20% of the inputs. And you can see that in a lot of things. Even Coca-Cola, there's one, 20% of the Coca-Cola drinkers drink 80% of the Coke. They're power drinkers. Your power users are across all kinds of fields. That's just one example. But so what you want to do is find for rapid learning, you want to get up to 80% quickly in a field, say. So find out what 20% is going to give you that so you can do it rapidly, right? Research what experts emphasize. So we say over here, use a chatbot, query ChatGPT or Claude and ask what that might be. Another great tool for learning, and I can't say this enough, but is Notebook LM, and check that out. It's a Google platform, and it's great for learning things. They make instructional videos. You can drag in material, and it'll make an instructional video for you. I've used it and actually put it in a number of my courses. On the Udemy platform, because I'll take my material and I'll put it in there and it comes back and I'm like, that it actually says it better than I do in many ways. It's like it's another way. And what you want to do a lot of times is hear material from many different angles. Sometimes it's interesting. I have some courses, I have a lot of courses, and especially my corporate finance course. I go over things from many different angles. It's a pedagogical technique, right? A teaching technique where you explain things and you explain it one way and they explain it a different way. Sometimes it's good to use it across different media, like maybe you watch a video, or maybe you read something, or maybe you hear a lecture, all these different ways. But and sometimes people will complain and say this course has a lot of redundant material, and oh my gosh, and it's not really redundant. It's saying kind of the same thing in a different way. And if you feel that it's redundant, that's a good thing, because that means you already know it. And then okay, great, I'm hearing it again, I don't really need this, but that means that I know this material. And that's the way. It's sort of like repetition. Your spaced repetition. You're hearing it again and again, a few times, not again and again, yeah, but not ad infinitum. And that really helps you to learn it. So that's why sometimes my courses and the videos might seem, gosh, that's repetitive. It's not really repetitive. It's just some people might take 2 or 3 times before the light bulb goes off and they get it. I don't want to make sure that everybody has a chance to hear things from a number of different directions until they understand it, because I know that's the way I learn. So in this case, 80% of the results, find the fundamental elements, test and iterate and invest deeply once you're identified in them. Now, here's a great thing, like 80% of the results, say in playing the guitar, what are the most used chords that, for nearly every song? And there's a lot of songs that have 3 chords or four chords. And once you learn those, you can play hundreds of songs. So learn those first instead of going off and learning thousands of chords and being all confused and not being able to play. I really like, there's a quote from Lou Reed. He was in the Velvet Underground, a seminal band, and then had a wonderful career. Okay. A lot of their songs, 1 chord, and he said, 1 chord is the best. 2 chords is pretty good. If you get into 3 chords, then it's getting to jazz. So, you can even think of that. Learn 1 chord and learn all the songs they play 1 chord with. And oh man, suddenly you can be like Keanu Reeves in The Matrix, where it's like, I know kung fu. Suddenly I know how to play the guitar. You're just playing strumming 1 chord and singing, and you might be able to learn, a whole bunch of songs. And then once you get that 1 chord down and get comfortable with that, and then try 2 chords, something like that for learning the guitar. I'm a guitar player, so I guess I'm, going off on that a little bit, but I think that's a great way. Anyone can learn how to play the guitar, and then you can be really fun at parties or really annoying, depending on what you play, right? Language, learn what are the most consistent words. In most languages, about 1,000 words in the newspaper is about 85% of daily conversation, or what's used in a periodical or something like a newspaper. So learn those 1,000 words. Don't learn 10,000 or 20,000 words. Learn to be conversational. In business, the same thing, like I just said about Coca-Cola, right? 20% of the customers equal 80% of the revenue. And that's really key. Focus on those customers, find them and nurture them. They're your super users. They're the ones you really want to cultivate, right? And so now let's move on here to the Feynman Technique. And Richard Feynman, if you don't know, fantastic guy. You should read the book, Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman. A brilliant Nobel laureate, Prize winning physicist, and also did all kinds of other things. He was really a polymath. He knew all kinds of stuff and was fantastically just curious and interested in things. So, if you can't explain it, you don't know it. And here's a great one on that. When Leslie Groves was the military head of the Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb project in the United States, where after Roosevelt died, they hadn't even read in Truman, who became president when Roosevelt died. He was the vice president, so they had to bring him up to speed on this, atomic weapon project. And so Leslie Groves went to the president, to Truman, and said, here's this, whole booklet on this, and this is, the project. It's really incredibly elaborate and all this stuff. And Truman said, he insisted that Leslie Groves go back and give him a 1-pager, write it all out in 1 page. And Groves said, I can't possibly write out the complexity of this in 1 page. And Truman said to him, if you can't write it in 1 page, you don't really know it. So that's the guy, it's really, really true. So in the Feynman technique, what you do, obviously you choose a topic, something, whatever it's going to be, and then you go and teach a child, I say here, but teach on a very, so anybody can understand it, not in a complicated way, not like Leslie Groves was trying to present the atomic bomb project to Truman. And then as you try to teach something, identify the gaps. Where are you vague? Where do you really not know what the next thing is or something like that? And then once you find those gaps, then you can fill them. You've identified the place, and then it's a diagnostic tool. What do I not really know? Another great way to do this is try writing, right? We think we know a subject. I mean, from my own personal experience, you think you know something, you sit down to write about it, and all of a sudden it's like hubba hubba hubba. You can't, the words don't come. Writing is such a painful process, but it really forces you to be clear, understand what you know and what you don't know, and then you can go back and fill in those gaps. Same thing with teaching. And basically, right now, that's kind of what I'm doing. This is sort of a meta project. I'm, conveying what I know about accelerated learning, and I can find out what I know and maybe what I don't know. But and practicing teaching really helps you to solidify the stuff that you know. So, um, and then you just simplify and refine using analogies, reconstruct, repeat, be creative about things. Don't always say it the same way, right? For your own benefit and for everybody else's. Um, one thing that you might want to do is, you could try this right now. Um, we're not going to really stay on this long enough for you to do this, but write out a concept. Just that's part you can do. Think about a concept, and then go try to explain it to someone. Even if you sit in the mirror and or just record on your phone and say things, and then you'll be like, oh, that's where I don't really, that's a gap, and then you can go back and really tighten up, and so you really understand things. In my course, MBA ASAP, my business course on my website, mba-asap.com, the test at the end is rigorous, and it's not a test just to put you through the hoops of, oh, you got to pass this test. I like to think of it as a diagnostic tool. You go through, you shouldn't pass it on the first time through unless you're really, really super talented. But as you don't pass it, you'll understand, oh, I really didn't understand, question 3 or question 8 or whatever. And then you can go back to the videos that cover that topic and drill it again until you really know that stuff, because it's really important to, and you can quiz yourself like that if you have the discipline, or you can have, chat GPT or Claude or something, make up a little quiz for you and help you do that. Those are the kind of things as an autodidacts we really have to do. So in this case, write that, the concept, explain it out loud, note every moment where you went vague, or hesitated, and study those gaps and repeat it and make it a little simpler. And that's the way to do it. You know, um, we're coming up with great ways to help ourselves here. So let's talk for a second about how memory works, because really that's what it is, right? Learning is about retention too, and be able to access things and then use them, right? And so we have two different kinds of memory, basically. We have a short-term memory, working memory, and a long-term memory. And what we're trying to do is take things from the short-term memory and put them into the long-term memory. I don't know if that's where they're located, but I'm just trying to, so working memory, short-term memory, it's limited space. Have you ever tried to, okay, I have to remember this phone number and then call this person like 847-533, and you're trying to like keep it in your short-term memory, long enough so that you can dial the phone or something like that. We can only, hold little chunks at a time, and it requires repetition to stay active. That's why we're continually repeating something until we have to do the thing so we don't forget it, right? And it's located in the prefrontal cortex, so maybe that's up here. And then long-term memory that's the big warehouse. And it's so interesting sometimes when I'm trying to remember something, and this is a weird phenomenon that we all have, is we know something, but we can't remember it. Like, I know that person's name, but it's not coming to me. How can we know that we know something and then not access it? That is just a crazy phenomenon in my mind. I mean, it's just amazing. But we're storing so much stuff. And sometimes, I mean, there'll be so many times where I'll say, what's that word? I can't remember that thing. So it starts with an L, I think. And sure enough, it starts with an L. How did I know that? You start to think about, how am I retrieving this and how am I storing this memory? What's the relational things that I'm using? It's very strange. It's we put things in memory in relational ways that then we can pull back. And the more relationships we have with something, the easier it is to recover something, to pull it out. So that's why being a generalist too, and reading widely and knowing history and things, then we have lots of contextual links to link anything new that comes in. And so then we have all these other surrounding things, and it makes it easier to retain and to recover that information, which is really important. And in this case, the long-term memory, it's distributed across the brain, which is really, really remarkable. Our brains are so unbelievably remarkable, and that's why it's fun to do this stuff, right? I mean, this is really why we want to. We have this tool, and we can really use it, and we can make ourselves better. So, active recall. This is another way, to do things. And so active recall, after studying, instead of like restudying stuff, don't just reread, retrieve your information. So when you're studying something, close the book, write down what you remember from it, right? And then it's sort of like the Feynman technique, quiz yourself, try to teach it, explain what you've learned to someone else. Um, and then set a timer and try to write down everything you can in a couple of minutes. That's a really good, practice to do. So these are great ways to try to learn quickly and to retain what we learn. Spaced repetition. So cramming is the enemy of memory. No kidding. Space is the ally. We talked about that. And here, why cramming fails. And I talked about not to cram. But memories need time to consolidate. You need to sleep on things. That whole thing we say sometimes, let me sleep on it. It's really important. That's how we learn. Um, and the ideal time to review over there is really great. And repeating, is less effective than reviewing over several days. Sleep between sessions actively consolidates. Our REM sleep, our dream state sleep is really important for consolidating the things that we've learned that day. And that's what we really want to be able to do. And it's the difficulty of recall. That's what makes it stick. I mean, that is really key. So, sure, it's difficult to recall things, but that's what's going to help you to really remember things. Sleep. Talk about sleep is nature's balm, as Shakespeare said, and I totally believe that. Consistent sleep, and trying to find a regular sleep schedule and really sticking with it and getting enough sleep, it's key for physical activity, and it's definitely key for mental acuity and mental activity, right? So sleep, cleans out the brain, it flushes the brain. It activates the diffuse mode, which is the creativity mode. That's why sometimes you can't figure out a project problem. You sleep on it the next day, boing, a great idea pops into your head. So, and it makes spaced, review work, and it consolidates memory. It actively, physically consolidates the memory, which is just awesome. So, I hope you're loving this as much. I'm so into this stuff. Um, So the next thing is study at twice the speed, which is really interesting. Try speeding things up to 2x. And we can do that with videos, right? And with audiobooks and things. Here's a UCLA study. They watched one group watched a lecture at once at normal speed, and the other group watched a lecture at 2 times the speed and then reviewed a week later, and they outperformed the 2 times. A really good tip for reading nowadays is, you can read on your Kindle or you can read a paperback, but also get the audiobook. And in your headphones, I'm pointing to my earbuds, but, in your headphones, set the audiobook at 2 times speed, and then you're reading faster and you're hearing it and you're also reading it, and your retention goes way up. And that is a great technique for learning quickly. And so that's a hot tip right there. So let's go on to the next guy here. Learning from multiple sources. As I taught said before when I was talking about how I learned piano, really learning from videos, learning from play along records, reading things, just going over things over and over, studying things, and then sleeping. Getting those multiple sources going, really, really key. Books. I love books. I have 74 published books. They're all on Amazon. But and I like to write for clarity and for learning. It's teaching myself as I write. But and audiobooks, podcasts are absolutely fantastic. Videos, that's a great way with YouTube and other sources now. I mean, you know, we it's all there for us. Practice, keep practicing things. A lot of skills that we want to do really take a lot of practice. They talk about 10,000 hours. I don't know if we need 10,000 hours, but to become a master. But you need to practice and practice consistently. And then teaching, once again, right? Teaching is a learning source, because as you teach, it tells you what you know and what you don't know. The Feynman technique, right? And so, building your learning playlist, crafting a learning plan is really key. And learning how you learn, that's a really meta type of thing, right? Like you're trying. How do I learn best? That's the techniques I'm going to use. And what are the 20% that's going to give me the 80% results? So here's something too. Like if you're taking notes, if you're in college or something, or you're going to a lecture, or even if you're in a meeting, taking handwritten notes, there's something about that active, between the hand and the memory that really, really helps you to retain information. Really critical. So here is a aspect of it. Brain activation, the mechanical repetition, handwriting activates the reading circuits. It's a motor skill. Now taping is also a great skill. Don't get me wrong here, but so the depth of processing, the memory cues, the engagement, all of this stuff, it really handwriting really helps. So think about that. Think about you know trying to employ handwriting and see if it works for you. It works for me. I know it does. So here we go again, and this is part of almost like the Feynman technique and others is test yourself, and use. I like to use AI tools now to test me on things, and or just test myself. What do I remember? How do I remember it? Even in my mind, sometimes I can go through and run through, like giving a little lecture, or trying to teach somebody something. You don't even have to have the other person there. You can just make believe, right, and project that. Um, but really, really key, rereading versus recalling. And active recall is much more effective. It reinforces memory. So making flashcards, great way to do things. Practice problems are really super to do. Teaching it, as we talked about, and closing the book and just trying to recite, what it is. So let's see here. Fast learning formula. So this is, I mean, basically the best way to do this is to use all of these different, techniques, and use them, in ways that work for you. And sometimes, you rely on one for a while, and then, oh, let me try that, and boom, the other one starts to, because it's a fresh method, really starts to help you. So, again, it's right tools for the right time, trying all different kinds of things to try to help us. Learn things, retain them, and be able to use them. Because at the end of the day, that's really what we want to do. Is we want to use what we learn. That's the key. That's the key, because and that's the best thing we can do in a way, is just to go out and immediately just start using what you learn. That's what MBA SAP is all about. So that's my dog barking. We have a maintenance guy here to fix our oven. Our oven broke. So that's what that's all about. So this is a really interesting one. SQ3R. Now this is from a Harvard study technique. This is what Harvard University recommends their students learn to study. And SQ, you know, 3R, three R's. Um, survey, question, read, recite, review. Just a great little acronym, right, for the kind of ways that you can do things. So you're transforming passive reading into an active retrieval kind of thing. That's the one thing we do. We don't just want to read. Reading is great, but it has to be active, engaged reading. You're engaging with the material, not just sort of reading along and then, what the heck did I read for the last hour? You really have to engage with the material for long-term retention, and that's what we're trying to do, is to really retain what we spend our time learning, because time is precious, right? So here's the different things, the different steps. Survey, just skim the material. Like if you're going to read a book, first, read the front cover, read maybe the inside notes, read the back cover, which is usually a description, a little summary of things, and then maybe flip through the table of contents, see how it's structured, and then maybe flip through, read a few, of the first paragraphs. Then you have an idea of what the material is, and then you can go back and and uh, and learn it. I like this, question. Turn every heading into a question. Instead of types of market structure, becomes what are the types and how do they differ? And then when you start to think that way, then as you read, you start to look for what the answers are to the question that you posed at the beginning. So then you read and read to answer, not to finish, right? You're not like, oh, I got to get through this chapter. It's like read to answer the questions that you posed in number two. Recite, close the book, recite what you recall, have a piece of paper, write down all the stuff that you just learned, and then review. And that's the space repetition kind of thing. Review afterwards, right? So to wrap this up, learning's not a destination. We are lifelong learners. We're autodidacts, right? That's what we want to be. It's a journey, and there's no end, and we have to enjoy the journey. There's no destination we're going to get to when we know everything there is to know. It's interesting. I have a copy of the 11th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, and that came out in 1911, and it's 30 volumes. It's gigantic. It has, you know, special chapters written by all, Houdini and Freud and all these experts in their field. I mean, it's just amazing. And they thought when they did that Encyclopedia Britannica, that was it. That was the end of it. Was the total consolidation of all the knowledge that anyone's ever going to know, and there was no more knowledge no more knowledge to be learned. No more things that were going to be, no new inventions. Can you imagine? That was their idea. That was their concept in 1911. And think of all the things that have come since then. So that just goes to tell you that it's not it's a journey. There's no destination here. So, and here's what I encourage you to do. Choose one technique and apply it, and stack the techniques, because skill stacking is really key, right? That's where we really get superpowers. So stack the techniques and commit to lifelong learning as a way of life, as a daily practice. And so here's the last slide to leave you with. The path to success is the continuous pursuit of knowledge. Knowledge, Francis Bacon said it at the beginning of the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution. Knowledge is power. And that's really true. If you want to gain power in the world, if you want to have more agency in your life, if you want to have more optionality, more opportunities come your way, we have to be continually expanding our skill sets and our knowledge. So, peace. I hope you found that useful, and I will, I will talk to you soon, and peace to all. Take care. Thanks for listening. And if you have any questions, please email me at john@mba-asap.com. Take care. I'll catch you soon.